All right, we're going to talk about psychological egoism today. So, the place to start when you're thinking about psychological egoism is to just pick something that you're doing or some action that you've done. Like in class, we discussed just the fact that you're taking basic problems of philosophy and begin asking yourself why questions. Why is it that you signed up for this course? And what you'll find is that you begin articulating things that you desire in a kind of increasingly ultimate way. So, you might answer, well, I wanted to learn about philosophy, right? You might also answer something about wanting to graduate and the way in which getting a degree these days is necessary for getting a decent job. And you needed to fulfill a divisional requirement in order to graduate and so get a good job. And it's really the job you're after. But in each case, we can ask again, well, why is it that you want a job after you graduate? And, the standard kinds of answers, you might say something about it playing a role in a career you want. For simplicity, we'll just suppose that the main reason is because you want to have some money to support yourself. But of course, money is not something that we want for its own sake. We want money only because it can get us something. Well, what do we want with money? Some kind of security, including a place to live, and physical belongings that we think are make for a better life. Well, why do we want these things? Well, you might start thinking, well, maybe down the road I want a family and I want to be able to have good things around for them and have a good house. And with my money, I might also want to buy down there, good clothes and do a hobby like play a sport or something. And if you keep asking these why questions, the thought is eventually you're going to get to something that feels like you've reached the end of inquiry regarding your reasons for having desires. So, for example, at the top right there, you have part of the reason that you want a place to live is so that you can be healthy, right? And yes, the health of maybe your future family might play a role, but you can ask, why do you want them to be healthy? Why do you want them to be happy? And it might be something like, well, it would be really irresponsible and wrong of me to not want that. And so you want to be a good person, right? And we can ask, well, why do you want to be a good person? And probably at the end of the day, you're going to be like, well, I think that probably will make me feel fulfilled, at the end of my life. I'm going to really hate it if I look back and don't think I did what I was supposed to do morally by my family or by whoever else. And likewise, a lot of these things are going to terminate in like pleasure of some sort. It doesn't have to be like, lower pleasures or bodily pleasures, but making you feel good in various ways. And in each case, notice that there's a case to be made we're always going to end up with, whether it's health or happiness or fulfillment or pleasure. These are all things about me, right? It's specifically my health and my fulfillment and my pleasure that I'm after. And yes, it's true that I want the health and fulfillment and pleasure of other people, but it seems like we can continue to ask, well, why is that something I want? And the egoist wants to convince us that the answer will eventually return to your fulfillment makes me feel fulfilled, or your happiness makes me feel happy, and that's why I want it. So this gives us a sense of this kind of, I'm calling this the great chain of desire, the basic idea of what psychological egoism says. It's a descriptive claim about what it is we actually desire. And really roughly, this is not the official definition, which we'll get to in a second, but the basic idea is that psychological egoism is the view that human beings are at bottom selfish, that we're sort of out for ourselves in some way, that our desires kind of all point to the self. Let's try to make that a little more precise. What does that mean? So let's introduce a couple of distinctions. Distinction between instrumental and ultimate desires, and a distinction between egoistic and altruistic desires. Once we have these distinctions on the table, we can go back and more precisely define what psychological egoism says. An instrumental desire, let's understand, is a desire for something X. That's just, a variable for anything at all. A desire for something X as a means to or for the sake of something else, Y, right? We talked about in class the desire you have for money, paradigm case of an instrumental desire. You want money not for its own sake so you can just stare at it. And if that's really all you want money for, something's gone wrong with your brain. Most normal people want money because of what they can get with it. An ultimate desire, by contrast, is a desire for something X for its own sake. That is, I want this thing, and I don't want it as a means to anything else. I'm not trying to get another thing with it. I just want it for its own sake. That's an ultimate desire. And the egoist's claim is that when we look at the great sort of chain of desire here, we find ourselves with the ultimate desires at the further right-hand side. And everything to the left is an instrumental desire. So the sort of semicircular arrows there are just indicating that these are things that are desired for their own sake. And you'll notice that in each case, there's a me element. I mean, I've put the brackets to make it explicit, but it's my fulfillment, my health, my pleasure. So the ultimate desires there are all egoistic desires. And an egoistic desire is just a desire for one's own interests, well-being or welfare to be furthered or promoted in some way. If I want to be happy, and I'm talking about myself, that's an egoistic desire. If I want you to be happy, I'm talking about you, then that's an altruistic desire, a desire for another person's interests, well-being or welfare to be promoted. So again, over on the right, you see ultimate and egoistic. Those are the desires that seem to be the sort of terminus of the great chain of desire, ones that are both ultimate and egoistic. The final little definition that we'll introduce is the idea of a motive or a motivation. We can think of a motive as just a desire that is the cause of or the reason for an action. So here's a person who is hungry. She has a desire for food. That causes this action of walking down to the kitchen maybe and getting some pizza. The motive there is the desire for food. It's important to see that a single action can have many motives, and often this is certainly the way we work psychologically, right? So if you began to ask her, why do you want food? She might say, well, I'm hungry and I want to get rid of this pain of hunger. She might say, I really love the taste of pizza. She might also say, like, well, I'm a human. I've got to eat at some point or I'll die and I want to live. And the desire to live, the desire for pleasure, whatever else that's sort of in the background, those are also motives for her action, because they're also contributing to her causally to her movement across the room to get the pizza. The claim that psychological egoism makes is a claim about ultimate desires or ultimate motivation. And the claim is, this is the official definition, psychological egoism, or PE, says that every human action is ultimately motivated by egoistic desires. So it's really important to see here that what the egoist is and is not saying. They are not saying that we have no altruistic desires. We absolutely do. We want our friends to do well and be happy in life. The egoist claim is just that every altruistic desire is an instrumental desire. The only ones that are ultimate, the only ones that are things we want, desires we have for things for their own sake, are egoistic desires. And specifically, those things give rise to all of our actions. Those ultimate egoistic desires explain every behavior that human beings do on a day-to-day basis. if you see someone doing something and you ask why, you'll always end up with an ultimate egoistic desire as the motive.